The stifling heat of the dry season enveloped us as we walked, the tension in the air palpable. Wendy, my mother-in-law, carried a small bottle of antiseptic, its presence unsettling. It was unclear whether she brought it out of genuine concern for cleanliness or if it served a more sinister purpose, hinting at a deeper malice in her actions. The thought nagged at me, swirling in my mind as we prepared to leave. "Mom, let's go home," I suggested, feeling the weight of Wendy's scrutiny upon us. As we made our way back, Mary, my daughter, broke the silence with a shocking revelation that sent a chill down my spine. "So your company's going to go bankrupt," she announced, her voice slicing through the air like ice. The weight of her words hung heavily around us, each syllable cutting deeper than any knife. I felt as if the air had frozen, my heart racing in response to the fear and uncertainty that accompanied her news. "My name is Sasha James, and I turned 55 this year. I have faced life's challenges without the support of a husband. My daughter, Maria, was born 25 years ago, on a day that was meant to be filled with joy, but instead marked the beginning of my solitude. My husband had run a thriving company, always busy yet filled with love for me. When he proposed, I hesitated, unsure about the role of a CEO's wife, but I wanted to believe we could make it work, even as fate conspired against us. On the day of Mary's birth, my husband had rushed to the hospital, driven by excitement and love. Just weeks earlier, he had undergone heart bypass surgery, which had seemed successful, and we had hoped for a future together. But fate can be cruel. He never made it to the delivery room. The joy of my daughter's arrival quickly turned to heartbreak, and the room that should have celebrated life felt instead like a somber funeral. I had to summon the strength to raise Mary alone, a journey filled with exhaustion and the burden of solitude. Mary's early childhood was not without its challenges. I still vividly remember the day her preschool teacher reprimanded her for being mean to a friend. I confronted her, my disappointment evident as I watched her small face crumple in confusion. She tried to explain herself, but tears streamed down her cheeks, and in that moment, I realized the weight of my expectations on her young shoulders. As the days passed, Mary matured and learned to communicate better, but it was a slow process. Each day presented its own challenges, yet we forged countless memories that would last a lifetime. When Mary graduated from college, I felt a wave of pride mixed with nostalgia. She had just turned 25, and to celebrate, I baked her a cake. "Happy birthday, Mary. I made you this," I said, watching as her eyes lit up with joy. "Wow, Mom, you made this? It's amazing, thank you." As I looked at her, I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be our last birthday celebration as just the two of us. Next year, with her fiancé David joining us, our family dynamics would change forever. My gaze wandered to the engagement ring on Mary's finger, a silver band that gleamed with promise. She had come home just days ago, radiating joy as she showed it off, her smile infectious. Seeing her happiness brought back memories of my own engagement day, a bittersweet reminder of the love I had lost. Mary and David had been together since high school, almost a decade now. They had weathered storms together, but were finally reaching their goal of a shared future, and I was proud of their resilience. As I stared at the flickering candle on the cake, a wave of sadness washed over me. I whispered to myself, "It'll be lonely when she leaves." Unexpectedly, tears rolled down my cheeks. "Mom, thank you for everything," Mary said, her voice soft and sincere. "Even after I get married, I'll always be your daughter." I wanted to send her off with joy, a stark contrast to how I had said goodbye to my husband. Before long, David arrived at our house to formally ask for Mary's hand in marriage. "Sasha, thank you for watching over us for these 10 years. I promise to make Mary happy. Please, let me marry her." My heart swelled with a mix of emotions, joy for their love and a pang of loss for what I would soon give up. "What should I do?" I asked, half teasing, as laughter filled the room, easing the earlier tension. David's presence brought a sense of stability, and I knew that my daughter's happiness lay with him. He often visited, and we shared family trips together. His formal request felt almost unnecessary. I trusted him completely. I believed my late husband would have approved of their union. Still, a part of me worried for Mary. She had always struggled with expressing her emotions. Please be patient with her, David. If she's wrong, talk things through calmly. But if it's something serious, like cheating, bring her to me right away. Our laughter echoed once more, and in that moment, I recognized how much David cared for Mary. Yet, there were still obstacles to navigate. David's mother, Wendy, was a formidable presence, a CEO whose responsibilities often postponed their family meetings. It's just hard to find a time for her, David explained apologetically. After several cancellations, Wendy finally set a date for the family meeting, a Saturday next month. Let's make sure it happens. Don't cancel on us again, I insisted, a sense of unease creeping in as I recalled her sharp tone. On the day of the meeting, I dressed formally, anxious about Wendy's potential criticism. Mom, you don't have to dress so formally, Mary said, her tone casual. I just have a feeling Wendy will have something to say about anything less. We arrived early at the restaurant, anticipation coiling in my stomach as we waited for David and Wendy. When they finally arrived, Wendy's presence was striking, polished, and intimidating. I'm Wendy, David's mother. Nice to meet you, she said, her voice sharp and her movements graceful, but her gaze felt like a knife, cutting through any warmth. She sighed as she led the way inside, leaving little room for conversation. Sorry about my mom, David whispered. She's always been like that. I've found her difficult too. It's okay, I replied, trying to mask my apprehension. I always thought she seemed like someone from a different world, like nobility. David's face clouded for a moment at the mention of nobility, perhaps grappling with the expectations that came with it. Mom's already inside. Let's go, he urged, the heaviness of the air thickening around us. Following Mary into the private room, I found Wendy already seated at the head of the table, her posture perfect and commanding. I felt as though she was making a statement about status, subtly reminding me of my perceived lower rank within this family hierarchy. I've heard you have back problems, she remarked coolly, her words dripping with condescension. You will need to be near the door, in case you need the restroom. The atmosphere felt charged, and I braced myself for the meeting ahead, uncertain of what lay beneath Wendy's polished exterior. As the conversation unfolded, I found myself navigating the delicate balance of wanting to support my daughter, while also standing my ground against Wendy's biting remarks. Each comment from Wendy felt like a test, a challenge to prove my worth as Mary's mother. I kept my composure, determined not to let her intimidate me. Despite the tension, I focused on the love that had brought us all together, hoping that in this meeting, we could establish a family bond that would only strengthen as Mary and David stepped into their new life together. Wendy spoke with authority, outlining her expectations and subtly criticizing my parenting choices over the years. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I listened, but I also recognized that this was part of the new dynamics we had to face. I was willing to put aside my own discomfort for Mary's sake. I watched her interact with David, their shared glances and quiet laughter filling me with hope. Even amidst the storm of Wendy's judgments, I believed in the love that bound my daughter and her fiancé, a love strong enough to withstand any challenge that lay ahead. In that moment, I knew that my role as a mother was evolving, and though it would be difficult to let Mary go, I had faith in her future with David. As the meeting continued, I steeled myself for whatever would come next, determined to navigate this new chapter with grace and love. Thank you for your consideration, but wouldn't it be better for you to sit by the door? You might need it more, I suggested, my tone calm yet resolute. Wendy's expression hardened, a clear sign that she was unaccustomed to being addressed so directly. It was as if my words had struck a nerve. There's no need to worry about me. Thank you for your concern, she replied, her smile feeling forced and lacking warmth. As we began our meal, the atmosphere at the table grew tense. The clinking of cutlery was accompanied by an awkward silence that settled like a heavy fog. Didn't your parents teach you the proper order to eat food? Wendy continued, her voice edged with disdain. You start with soup, then bread, then the main dish, and finally the side dishes. It's common sense, and part of good manners. The smugness in her tone made it clear she took pride in her strict adherence to etiquette, as if her social status depended on it. The reason we start with soup is to stimulate digestion, she added, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of imparting wisdom. I shot a quick glance at David, who offered an awkward smile. It was apparent that he had been raised in a household that valued these rigid social norms, but in my home, the rules had been different. I had raised Mary with a focus on the basics, how to behave at the table, like not walking around during meals and chewing quietly. Wendy's elaborate etiquette seemed more suited for formal occasions, rather than the relaxed dinner we were sharing. When Mary instinctively reached for the main dish first, I noticed a flash of irritation that crossed Wendy's face. It was as if she had been personally offended by Mary's casual approach to dining. What Wendy is saying is correct, I interjected, trying to defuse the tension. But isn't the essence of manners about consideration for others? Shouldn't good manners reflect respect for the other person? Criticizing someone for lacking manners is, in itself, poor manners. Wendy's face flushed with anger, and I could feel her internal struggle. Talking to someone so uncultured is exhausting. David, you should reconsider this marriage. Your mother is too crude for our family. Or Mary. Perhaps you should cut ties with this woman and learn proper manners if you wish to be our daughter-in-law, she declared, her voice dripping with condescension. Please don't speak that way about my mom, Mary responded, her voice steady but firm. You may be David's mother, but I won't allow you to insult her. The tension in the air thickened, and suddenly, Wendy's actions took a shocking turn. She reached into her bag and splashed a liquid over my head. The acrid smell of alcohol invaded my senses, and I was momentarily stunned. Poor people rub off on you, so you need to be sanitized, she sneered, her malice evident in her tone. Mom, let's go. Yes, let's go home, Mary urged, her voice rising in urgency as she took my hand. David stood frozen, his face a mask of shock, clearly unable to comprehend his mother's blatant disrespect. I'm sorry, David, Mary said quietly, her eyes filled with distress. Don't apologize, he replied, his tone low and serious. We are from a higher class than these two. Soon, your company will go bankrupt, Wendy asserted, her arrogance cutting through the tension like a knife. Mary shot back, her voice icy and unwavering. What are you talking about? Without another word, she wiped the liquid from my clothes, her movements quick and purposeful. We left the restaurant, not once looking back at Wendy, the tension of the moment still clinging to us as we stepped outside into the cool night air. Days passed before David arrived at our house, looking pale and worn. His usual vitality was replaced by exhaustion, and I could see the weight of his family's expectations pressing down on him. I should have apologized sooner, he said, his voice thin and strained. I've been trying to convince my mother to change her ways, but she refuses to admit she's wrong. So I came to apologize on my own. The sincerity in his voice pierced through the discomfort in the air, and despite his struggles, I felt a deep connection to him after all these years. Come inside, David. Let's have some tea. You've been through a lot. Are you okay? I asked, sensing that he had much on his mind. It felt awkward to pry, but the worry etched on his face compelled me to reach out. To be honest, I've always hated my mom, he confessed, his frustration evident. She's always demanded that I repay her for raising me, and has pressured me with her expectations. I could visualize the suffocating environment he described, and I understood how it could stifle someone's spirit. I've always been told I was the heir, that I had to follow the family's expectations. I rebelled once in high school when she wanted me to attend a prestigious private school. Instead, I chose to go to a public school with the baseball team, where I met Mary. She was a team manager, and I fell in love with her. No matter what my mother says, I want to marry Mary. Please let me marry her. David's desperation was palpable as he knelt on the floor, his eyes brimming with emotion. David, look up, I said gently, wanting to reassure him. It's not just about me. It's about you and Mary. I've seen how much you care for her over these past 10 years, and I trust you with her happiness. Slowly, he lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. The fear that his mother's actions would jeopardize everything was written all over him, but beneath that fear was an undeniable love for Mary that shone brightly. David, if you truly want to make Mary happy, you need to break free from your past, I encouraged him. He nodded, understanding dawning on his face. I'm tired of living in fear of her. My father, who's still in the hospital, was the only one who ever understood me. He said that my mother could never grasp what I was going through. For my father's sake, I've made up my mind. I'll support you and Mary, but it's up to you to take the next step. His determination was evident in his voice, and I could see the resolve building within him. I understand. I'll do it. The time for confrontation finally came. Wendy arrived at the restaurant, her expression immediately shifting to one of displeasure as she surveyed the family diner, a place that was clearly beneath her expectations. What is this cheap place? She exclaimed, scanning the room with disdain. These are the papers for the adoption, David said, his voice steady and unwavering. Adoption? Wendy's incredulousness was palpable, her eyes wide with disbelief. Yes, David is officially joining our family, I confirmed, my tone firm. This is outrageous. He's my only son. How dare you try to take him from me? Wendy shouted, slamming her palms on the table. This marriage is a joke. Mary isn't worthy of David. We are of a different class. We help people like you, not the other way around. Her words dripped with contempt, but I stood my ground. Why are you so obsessed with social status? I work with many wealthy clients, but those truly born into wealth don't act like you. Only those who recently gained wealth are as insecure as you, I countered, challenging her misplaced arrogance. Wendy began to tremble, her facade of superiority cracking under the pressure. Don't compare me to those people. I was born into wealth. Your actions say otherwise. What are you so afraid of? I pressed, sensing the cracks in her carefully constructed identity. At the mention of fear, Wendy froze, and for a moment, I could see the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. David told me you were always told you weren't good enough because you were a girl. So what? I was born a girl in a family where only men mattered. I had to marry a man older than me just to maintain my family's status. The bitterness that poured out of her was a revelation, exposing the insecurities that had driven her obsession with controlling David's future. That's why you're so desperate for David to be the heir. But if he marries Mary, your family's perfect lineage will be tainted by a commoner, I asserted, feeling the tension crackle in the air. Shut up. You don't know anything. Wendy's voice trembled with anger, but deep down, I could see her resolve starting to falter. Just then, David's father, Brian, entered the room in a wheelchair, a quiet authority surrounding him despite his physical limitations. Wendy's face turned pale as she saw him approach. David pushed his father forward, the weight of the situation hanging heavily in the air. This is what your father wanted, David declared, his voice steady. Wendy's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. No, you misunderstand. I never thought marrying you was humiliating. Her words faltered, and she struggled to form a coherent excuse as she flailed for control. Brian sighed, shaking his head in disappointment. Dad says he's divorcing you, David announced coldly, and Wendy's panic reached a fever pitch. Divorce? No, please say something, she implored, desperation flooding her voice, but Brian remained silent, his gaze fixed on his son, resolute in his decision.